special days in our tradition. Technically, it would be on the 8th of December, but we usually celebrate it on the Sunday that's closest to the 8th. And that is the day that we mark as the awakening of the Buddha Shakyamuni, who is the Buddha of this world, lived in India some 2,500 years ago, and set the wheel of Buddhist teachings, or what we call Dharma, rolling in this world. So for the past week, a number of people, about 20 of us, have been sitting here at the temple all day long, each day, in a kind of celebration, commemoration, and communion with the Buddha's awakening. And growing up in a Catholic family, those little wafers don't always taste great. If you're laughing, it means you probably grew up in a Catholic family. And sesshin can be like that. There's difficulty and there's beauty, and there's all kind of different levels of things. And that's really important. Oftentimes our kind of romantic vision of the path is one of just bliss and ease. But in actuality, a spiritual path is arduous, as well as bliss and ease. And that's why we take up these kinds of practices. Sometimes people will say to me, they'll say, "Why is sesshin so hard?" And I will say, it's not. Life is hard, right? And you're paying attention to life in the form of sesshin. And so you're seeing its hardness. But your day-to-day life is not particularly easy, right? But when you come to sesshin, you can taste that difficulty. And then usually after a few days, people see like, oh yeah, of course, there's difficult things, and there's beautiful things, and there's this wholeness to life, which is really important. And that's what I want to talk about this morning a little bit in relationship to the precepts. This morning, 4 people, Louise, Andy, Jakuden, or Levi, and Shuyen will receive precepts in this particular lineage, and that will be the bulk of what we do this morning. When we talk about precepts, almost always we're talking about them in terms of a behavioral guidelines, or a kind of like a way of describing a path of practice and liberation. And that's a very good way to think about precepts. They provide that for us. So if we look at the 16 Bodhisattva Precepts, which you'll hear a lot about this morning, the 16 Bodhisattva Precepts, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then the 3 pure precepts, which are to cease from evil and to do good, and to embrace all beings. Actually, the technical translation that I like would be embracing codes and forms, which means like embracing the rules that keep you from doing stupid stuff. And then embracing good dharmas, which is embracing good teachings, which help us do the positive and transformative things. And then embracing living beings. So those are the three pure precepts. And then there's the 10 grave precepts, which are all injunctions. They're all no's. They're like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. I won't list them all out. That has a lot to do with that first pure precept, right? Follow these no's, the ones where we're stopping things that cause problems. So when we embrace those bodhisattva precepts, when we are embraced by those bodhisattva precepts and we do our best to live through them, it really does transform our lives. If you take a precept like not praising self and criticizing others, that's one of the precepts. Just think about, like, how long has it been since you praised yourself and criticized others? I think if you're really thinking about it, it couldn't be more than 15 minutes. Really, it's probably no way if you're paying attention. Right? You're paying attention. So because it's a constant habit of our mind to tilt the world in our own favor, right? That this precept points to something that's really fundamental about orientation. So on one level, we practice with the precepts. Maybe we don't realize most of the time. And then we're in some interaction and we're kvetching about something and we're, oh, why do these people have to be like this? And which the implication is I'm really good. I wouldn't do it like that. And then we stop and we go, oh, wait a minute. I don't want to live like this. You can feel the contraction. You can feel the way in which your life becomes small and narrow and not filled with the kind of vitality that you know it can be. And you say, I'm going to try to do it different. Maybe you make amends, maybe you atone, but in some way, you try to navigate in a different way. The more you do that, the more sensitive you become, and the more immediate you're able to start feeling those things and to orient. So that's a path of practice. And that's the way that we typically talk about the precepts. But I'd like to talk about them in a slightly different way this morning for just a short bit. The Buddha took the seat underneath the Bodhi tree. He had gone on this long journey after leaving the palace where he had lived from the time of his birth. And different kinds of practices, different things that he did to investigate the way. And none of it really worked. All of it had its place. It was all important, but none of it really worked. And he was kind of at his wit's end when he received an offering from a woman named Sujata, a bowl of milk that had been cooked down into a porridge. And this set him on a different path, a path of realizing that it wasn't just something that you do that gets you to be able to understand the spiritual life, but it's also something that you receive. And after that pivotal moment, the Buddha journeyed in a different way until he was able to receive the presence of the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree means the tree of enlightenment. And coming upon the Bodhi tree, he circumambulated it, and then on the east side, he stopped, and he took what we refer to as the diamond seat, the immovable seat. He stepped back, his back was to the tree, and he sat in this posture that we call zazen, both a physical posture, but also a spiritual posture, a mental posture, a posture of breath. And when he sat there, it said that Mara, the deceiver, the personification of delusion, saw that there was trouble brewing. Probably had seen it before that, but this was really the inflection point. Mara got disturbed. It was like, uh-oh, someone's going to upend my game. As Mara's game is always a game of buy and sell. You know, devil's bargain, right? You get what you want. Like, what are those kind of horror movies and stuff where, like, you know, the woman really wants to be beautiful, and so the devil makes her really beautiful, but then she goes blind. You know, those kind of things, right? This is Mara's work, right? Give you something, but also take something else away. Always keeping us off balance, always keeping us unsatisfied, so that we'll keep the wheel churning. So here he sees a being that is engaging total stillness of body, stillness of spirit, and clear seeing. And he knows that this may upend the game. And so Mara raises a great army of all of these kind of demonic forces. And they all have different weapons, and they all have a different way of trying to push the Buddha off of his seat. And Mara calls the attack. I just want you to envision that for a moment. The Buddha sitting there underneath. You could pick any kind of tree, but it should be big. Broad branches and leaves. And there, a youngish man sitting, serene, light emitting from his body. And the edge of that illumination, there are these faces. They're holding swords, axes, clubs, and they radiate out in all directions. This is the scene of the Buddha's awakening. Mara calls the attack, and all of these forces of delusion, they do different things. First, Mara calls forth a storm. There's a massive flood, and then there's massive winds, and then all of these Mara's armies hurl their weapons at the Buddha and throw coals, and then they rush the Buddha. There's a whole saga there that if you like that kind of thing, please Google it. It's wonderful. And I've recommended this a lot of times. There's a documentary called The Buddha, made by public broadcasting, and that particular scene is wonderful. The artwork is really good. It's all kind of animated in this paper. You know, like how you make animations with like puppets rather than drawing it, and they're all paper, and it's really well done. So I should start getting a royalty fee from LPB for recommending that movie. Anyway, so that's the situation, right? And the Buddha doesn't move. So with the great flood, it says not even the hem of his robe was wet, not even a drop of dew. With the great wind, not even the corner of his robe fluttered in the wind. As the battle axes hurled through the air, they all turn into flowers and they fall at the Buddha's feet. When the hot ash becomes powdered incense and falls at the Buddha's feet. This is the scene of the Buddha's awakening. The reason I'm bringing this up this morning is oftentimes when we think of spiritual practice, we forget the hordes of delusion that are part of the mandala. All of those beings, the Buddha did not resist one iota. He received. Because he knew the perfection of receiving, all of the things that they tried to give to the Buddha were transformed. The Buddha was transformed by the receiving of the milk in the golden bowl, and now he knew that total receptivity changed the world. And this is what the precepts are about. To navigate isn't just to set out on a spiritual quest where I'm going to make things correct, I'm going to make myself good, I'm going to make myself right, etc. It means that we actually have to learn to receive correctly. And in receiving correctly, we know how to give up the stuff that is destructive. We know how to embrace good dharmas. We know how to embrace living beings. Samsara and nirvana are not to be split apart. The delusion and the awakening in that scene are not to be split apart. And the precepts allow us to walk that line where we're not just trying to banish the delusion, we actually receive it and work with it. That's where a path comes from. If we're just trying to get rid of the delusion, then no path really appears. And you can see this a lot. People become, maybe good at meditation on what good is, but, they can kind of clear your mind and you get used to it. And they get super grumpy. Have you ever met anyone like that? No. Yeah. It is funny, right? Because it's a kind of self-grasping that happens it's very natural. And if you look closely, you were probably also one of these people, right? Yeah. And so that kind of division that is in our heart, the wholeness of life, is so hard for us to recognize, receive, and then live through. It's not the spiritual hero in the traditional sense which can understand that. Right? It's the humble seeker who knows how to receive, that can see that the wholeness of life is necessary. All of the delusion as well as all of the awakening. That's where the vibrancy is. And the precepts, again, they guide us back to that. This tradition is alive. What I mean by alive is that it's always received. So we receive it in this generation and we live it out. The receptivity with which we receive the tradition, here it will be in a formal sense receiving the precepts, but even if this is your first time here today and you received, for example, some instruction in meditation, you receive that and then you put it to practice. That's it. That's it. There's no box. You have not entered any box called Buddhism or Buddha I temple or I belong to this or I am that or anything. Right? There's no box. That's what I mean by alive. When you learn to receive, you become less concerned with the box and you become concerned just with how do I live out this teaching that I've received, whether that's a teaching in a formal sense, or that's the kind of teaching that comes from the touch of a child's hand. I know I've been saying that in my talks this week several times. It's because I really miss my grandkids. And I can just feel their hands. They're so little. Yeah. So the reason that I'm emphasizing that is sometimes people will say things like, well, I know some people need that. Some people need the forms. They need the tradition. They need the robes and that kind of thing. But I just don't think I need that kind of thing. I think I can do without that. Great. Hallelujah. But be careful. What do you mean by that? Do you mean I'm going to go it alone? Or do you mean I know how to receive in a way that doesn't need to include those things? Because if what you mean is I'm going to go it alone, good luck. There is a path, it's called the path of the Pratyeka Buddha, that is an isolated awakening. It is celebrated in our tradition, right? But it has real drawbacks. Right? And what we emphasize in this path is the path of the Buddha or the path of the Bodhisattva, in which all beings are included in awakening. So we have to learn to receive. This may not be the tradition for any given person. It won't be the tradition for almost anyone, right? On the number sense, right? But that's not the point. Okay? The point is it's alive and it will live through those who receive it. On the precept of not praising self and criticizing others, Dogen's verse commentary goes like this. Buddhas and ancestors realized the entire sky and the great earth. Manifesting the great body, there is no inside or outside in the sky. Manifesting the Dharma body, on earth there is not an inch of ground. And this is enigmatic, but really beautiful. You think about that dynamic of trying to make ourselves good or right, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're just praising ourselves, but it's a kind of motion that we want to get it. This is good medicine. The Buddhas and ancestors, they realized the entire sky and the entire earth, not just my idea of it. And in the manifestation of the great body, there's no inside or outside in the sky. Think about that. The sky is such a wonderful teacher. It's completely ungraspable. And one of the ways it's so ungraspable is like it doesn't even reject things that you don't want to be there, like power lines and planes and all the kind of things that may sort of ruin your view. The sky seems quite unperturbed about all of these things. Did you notice that? Yeah. No inside or outside. It's really beautiful. Think about that next time someone is doing something annoying. No inside or outside. And manifesting the Dharma body, on earth there's not an inch of ground. So if we think about the wholeness of the earth, just like we think about the wholeness of the sky, the earth is the manifest, it's the concrete. There is no place to take a stand where we can say, okay, here's the 1 square foot, which is the right way, which then defines all the other ways as the wrong way. It says there's no such thing. This Dharma body of the Buddha doesn't play that game. That's the game of Mara. Right? And the Buddha doesn't stand in opposition to that at all. Simply encourages us. Appreciate the great earth. All of the beings. And so this is what all this business of wrapping ourselves in robes is about. We call it a formless robe. So it has a form. A Rohatsu is the smallest version of a Buddha's robe, 5-paneled robe. And it definitely has a form, right? Like if you can see it, that means it has a form. But every morning before we put it on, we chant that it is formless. How great the robe of liberation, a formless field of merit. So just the same way, there's no inside or outside in the sky. There is no inside or outside of the robe. And that's the encouragement to live the best way that we can. And to walk our own path, but to walk it with all other beings. This is the great circle of life, which the Buddha awoke to and transmitted to Mahakashapa and has been handed down to us today through the generations. So I'll exit the hall now to change my robe, and there'll be a little bit of preparation for the ritual. Usually takes 5 minutes or so, so it's a good time if anyone needs to go to the restroom or those kinds of things. And then we'll begin in about 5 minutes. I'd encourage you to join in with the ritual as much or as little as you feel called to. If you've already received precepts, it's the tradition to join in with the receiving of the precepts again. A precept ceremony like this is a renewal of precepts for everyone. But if you haven't received precepts and you like to join in that way too, please feel welcome to do that. I always like to mention before a ritual like this that it's best to come into a kind of contemplative state, which means not to be too trying to figure things out. It's okay to try to figure things out, but you'll get bored really quick because there's not much to figure out. And it goes on for a while and it's a little bit slow. So if you come into a little bit more of that contemplative state, or just a kind of meditation on what's happening ritually, you'll find that there are parts of the ritual that just make sense to you. You might not be able to even explain in what way they make sense to you, but they will make sense to you. And there are other parts you'll be like, are they going to keep doing that? Or whatever it is. And that's just how ritual works. It has that kind of quality. So I just invite you to be present with it, and to thank you for everyone being here and being present for this important moment in the lives of these 4 people.